Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and we're back for part 2 of our discussion of the offense against the Minnesota Vikings in a game the Ravens really needed to win. It certainly wasn't an easy win. In a way, it's an NFC win. The Ravens are in an odd position because they're already in great tiebreaker shape relative to the rest of the division. They need to just win as many games as they can to make sure they at least get a tie.
Right. And that's I think an underrated part of where they are in the season is that they don't have to think, and I know no one inside the team is doing this, but even as a fan, as an analyst, you don't have to think about the detailed, complex implications of every single win-loss of the Ravens and looking at all the other games around the league each week and trying to calculate. They really are in a position where they control their own destiny pretty much at this point.
Oh, yeah. No, they fully do control their own destiny currently because they have the division game still left. But more than so, there's some outs where they can still lose games and still control their own destiny if they win a certain X of Y games kind of thing. But anyway, the voice you just heard, by the way, is Nik Mehta, who's joining me and also joining me for part 1 of this discussion. Nick, thanks for joining again.
Always such a pleasure, Ken.
Okay, we talked about a bunch of interesting stuff in the first episode. If you like rabbit holes, you'll like that because Nick and I are always going down them when we talk football with each other. And about the Ravens' turnover ability in these last few games. They're 7-0. Some of that's not giving the ball away on offense, which they've been good and they've also been lucky with, I believe, over the last 3 games. And the defenses, their 7 takeaways, I believe, is largely a function of them being good. That they've developed, generated more shots on goal. They've had positive game scripts, which has been a small contributing factor to it, relatively speaking. But they've got some good punch outs and they've got some loose bracket interceptions and loose bracket intersection opportunities that they've done well with. This is a game, by the way, that they had. I might think about Miami or this was the game. No, against McCarthy. They had 13 PDs, supposedly. Although the game book is wrong, they have a PD credited to Wiggins where he didn't touch the ball, and they had 12 quarterback hits in the game, which is a terrific number to have in one football game to put the quarterback on the ground 12 times.
Yeah, I think 4 bat downs at the line of scrimmage, and during the break, I was thinking about something I was saying in the first episode about their turnovers, their recent success, and who that's come against. I also think it's worth noting like they weren't as good at executing their end of turnovers and like catching the ball, making plays on the ball in the first half of the season. They've had obviously, Marlon Humphrey got to field a punt because Justin Jefferson fell down. But both of Malachi Stark's interceptions neither of them were easy plays. Both of them were the kind of plays you kind of expect him to make, given what you've seen from him. And of course, the Keandre Jackson punch out is just, that's just special teams really, really doing their job at a high level and creating that. And that can happen against any team, although I will note that the Vikings returner just seems to be an irresponsible ball handler in watching him return. And I'm not just talking about the 2 that he actually fumbled the ball. Multiple other times I was watching him and like cringing for the Titans special teams coach.
Yeah, for the Vikings special team coach, I think you're talking about in this game, right? So the one thing I noticed is that he's talking back to his coach on the sideline. If there's ever a time you say shut up and say yes sir, it's after you fumble the football. If there's ever a time when you say shut up, nod your head, and don't say even a word, it's after you fumble the football twice. So, he did not do a good job with that. All right. Let's move on. Talk a little bit about the offensive line, and we can start wherever you like.
Well, I guess the first thing I wanted to get your take on, Ken, was how do you approach grading? I know you've talked about your process some. I know you don't want to go too much into it, but how do you approach grading the offensive line against this kind of an opportunity set, against this kind of pressure that Flores is scheming up? How does that change, I guess, just on a basic level, your evaluation before we get into them itself?
It's probably a little bit more complicated to figure out who's responsible when there's a blitzing player. But most of the time, if the guy has a block, he's made his block. And if there's another blitzing player who's unaccounted for, then no part of that pressure is charged to an offensive lineman. So that's got to be the easiest way to do it. there are plenty of other opportunities, and there were a couple in this game where stunts were not picked up properly, and that's another matter entirely, where the handoff is not done properly. It can be for multiple reasons. It can be one guy holds on too long. It can be relative depth is not right, and then we have to try and figure out what the situation is there. But I would say the other thing that comes up in a game like this is everybody really should have a responsibility on most plays. There's a decided desire to avoid getting blocked by Daniel Faalele in opposing defenses. Nobody really wants to run directly into and try and bull rush Daniel Faalele because it just generally is not going to work. And to the degree they want to try things to one side of him, it's oftentimes a staggered play, which can make Faalele look very bad too, where they go one way and then they go the other, and he's looking right and looking left. He's too late on both, kind of thing. So anyway, there is some additional complication to it. It took a long time to score the game, but not really as much for the pass as it did for the run in this game. The run block is just so slow in this game in terms of going everyone, having to go between all 22 and the TV copy. The TV copy gives you great control of the play, and so it's what I really prefer is the DVR control is very high, but the all 22 you can't do without that angle for certain things. And another thing you can't do without the all 22 angle for is when the TV robs you of the beginning of the snap, and they don't show you what the in particular where the players are lined up and whether the feet are even or split at the snap, because that goes into our formation information. So anyway, a little bit of an insight into that, and you're right, it take a whole hour to go through that in terms of what our process is.
No, and I appreciate it even for my own knowledge. I was wondering, could we go through each individual player and then at the end talk about how the line did overall?
Sure.
Great. So let's start with Ronnie Stanley. The one big thing I noted about this game actually has nothing to do, much less to do with Stanley and more to do with Carson Vincent being active.
Yeah.
Given Stanley's risk to go down with an injury at any moment, I thought this spoke volumes about how they feel about Carson Vincent. So maybe a word on that before we get to Stanley.
Yeah, immense change for the Ravens. I noted it with the inactives as well, probably same as you did. That Vincent was active. Noteboom was not. Noteboom apparently was a healthy scratch for the game. At least let me put it this way: it didn't show up in the injury report all week. So unless he slipped on something in the hotel on Saturday, he probably was a healthy scratch for the game. And it, not only does that tell you they don't entirely trust Vincent, it tells you, they don't entirely trust Noteboom. It tells you they trust Vincent a lot more than I thought they did at this point already. So it speaks volumes in both directions, I would say.
And then as for Stanley, I felt upon watching that he was probably the best offensive lineman. I definitely felt his football, his smarts, his experience showed up against the blitz on a number of occasions.
Yeah, he did a number of positive things, and he had the fewest missed blocks. This was a game, a tremendous number of missed blocks in the run game. He had the fewest of any player with only 7, which it'd be a lot for a normal game, believe me. He gave up half a penetration in the run game. That was on the RL -2 by Mitchell on the drive where they finally got Mitchell going, and he ran the ball 3 straight plays for 9, 22, and -2. On the -2 play, he kind of released Dallas Turner inside. That is a play somebody else might look at it and score it differently, but I had a bunch of zeros for other players on the offensive line. I did have a -1 for Stanley, and then I think there might have been an either no, it was Bateman who was unable to do anything with the linebacker number 55. I'm not sure that you would expect him to, by the way, but he did the best he could to try and block him and got pushed way back, and that was half of that penetration there. So half a penetration for him, 1 full pressure, 1 full quarterback hit. The quarterback hit, he's beaten inside by Pace. Pace was the guy who wanted to end up getting the quarterback hit. It wouldn't have to be that way if it was the initial pressure. He'd probably get the lion's share of it anyway. But he got the whole thing on that play. 0.75. It's frankly better than he's typically been scoring this season. It's a C+ after adjustment. Didn't do a whole lot of other special things. The Ravens did make a lot of level 2 blocks in this game, but he had 2 of those. He made his only pull. Didn't have a highlight. There's not a lot to say about it other than he was a stabilizing factor in this game, and it was a very big deal that he didn't get hurt, and we would have had a trial by fire for Carson Vincent at that point.
Yeah. Over to Andrew Voorhees, even just watching live, you could just tell he was just having a lot of trouble It felt like both in the run and in pass protection, but really just could not hit his blocks in the run game. It looked bad. It looked like it might have been his worst game of the season.
Yeah, and that's what I have it as is his worst game of the season. I want to go through this. One of the big things is how many of your offensive line blocks of your missed blocks end up being losses at the line of scrimmage. I know it's in the article, so I'll ask people to take a look at that and find it. But he missed 13 blocks on the game, and a fair number of them were losses at the line of scrimmage, which are game. He's being manhandled some way or put out of position by his opposing number. A lot of his trouble was with Javon Hargrave directly. Javon Hargrave had a massive impact on the scores for both Linderbaum and Voorhees, but Voorhees gave up 2 1/3 pressures, and that works out as he got a third on one, he got 2 halves, and he got 1 full. So it was 4 different events that he was party to. And he also gave up half a sack. And he's the only one who was party to a sack during the game. So that was half his. And I think it might have been an unblocked runner was the other half of that. I got to check it real quickly here on the sack. He also had a false start in the game. Yeah, so it was Ricard getting beat by Van Ginkel was the other part of that sack. So, an eligible receiver who doesn't receive a score in this system. So anyway, 0.57 for Voorhees, definitely not a good game at all. He did have 3 blocks in level 2. One thing, Voorhees has got a string of consecutive pulls right now that he's made. It's up to about 15 or 16. I have to look at it again, honestly, after a game like this. It might not be worth mentioning because he was 1 for 1, on pulls in this game. They didn't have a lot of opportunity for it. And one other thing that hurt his score was he allowed Lamar ran him out of another pressure. So I eliminated his entire adjustment for that. And he ends up with a 0.57. That's 10 points short of passing at guard. So it wasn't really close either way. Even with some adjustment, he wouldn't have made it.
And to me, that's, this has been a constant concern. I think because of last year, Daniel Fa'alele draws the most vitriol and criticism online. But to me, Voorhees has struggled just as much, close to just as much. And that was really evident in this game. I think one of the things that compounds Voorhees' struggles is when Linderbaum struggles next to him, as happened in this game, because Linderbaum has had a number of very good games recently, I've felt. And when he is playing well, he does have that impact of bringing up the play of the guards next to him. But when he's not playing well, it can really fall off a cliff.
Well, Voorhees, I don't really buy into the notion that Linderbaum is hurt by the guards or Linderbaum is particularly helping the guards. Not really either one. But Voorhees, the 6 games previously had 5 games in the B grade and 1 D. So he'd been playing very well since the first 2 games of the year until this game. And this game, he really fell flat. It was his worst game of the season. And the 2 games that were close in the first week, he got a D-. He got a D at 0.68. And then against Cleveland, he got a 0.61 on an adjusted basis, which is still in the F range. So, this was worse than he's played. And I made the point that for the first 2 games of the year, he actually played worse in a 2-game span than Daniel Fa'alele did at any 2-game span during the entire 2024 season when he struggled for much of the year. All right.
I was going to say, and I think going on to Linderbaum, it is, I don't know if I guess I would have to go look back at the articles. I don't know if you have a quick way of looking at it. Is there any correlation between when that interior trio struggles? Do they tend to struggle more together? Or is it really very independent, their grades week to week? Because I know you grade them independently, but I'm wondering if there is any correlation in that.
Yeah, that's a good question. It wouldn't surprise me if there were, and it's the correlating factor would be the quality of the defenders they're up against. So if they have a high quality defender and Javon Hargrave meets that standard opposite them, then he may give multiple linemen trouble. And I think there probably would be something like that. But there had been, the guy who's having the really bad pass blocking year or had been for most of the season isn't either Fa'alele or Voorhees, it's Linderbaum. Linderbaum's terrible as a pass blocker. And this game he struggled again. He gave up, and we'll just jump onto him here. He gave up parts of 6 pressure events, and it was 3 fulls and 3 halves. So it was a substantial hit to his score of 9 points from that. He also missed 10 blocks in the game. So he's having a lot of trouble at the line of scrimmage making his blocks. He did have some trouble in level 2 as well. He was getting out there at least though and making some blocks in level 2, which was a positive. Had 5 blocks there, but 0.62 was his base score at center. He had a small adjustment on the top of that for 0.03. He's still approximately 8 points shy of a passing grade at 65 on an adjusted basis. So an F for Linderbaum, and he just had an A and an A minus in the previous 2 games. So unfortunate regression in play, because it looked like, honestly, one of the things it looked like was that the Ravens might have been getting to a point where they could have gotten comfortable offering him a contract. And now maybe they're dragging their heels into December on this a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too into the weeds on that, but I was going to make the same observation, which is it's hard to make an argument for him to be the highest paid center in the league, based purely on performance, based on cap inflation, all that, sure, but not by any significant margin. Any bump that he would get over Creed Humphrey at the top of the market at this point, to me, would have to be more symbolic than a true resetting of the center market.
Okay. So you give $10,000 more in total money over a 4-year period. To me, even that, I probably wouldn't do it. I don't think I don't think it meets the 95% of the player at 90% of the price rule, let alone the 80-20 rule, which the Ravens would like to use.
I absolutely agree. I think to me it's the low. What would be acceptable would be 18.25 per year, 250,000 more a year, being that more symbolic without actually being that much more expensive when you factor in the higher cap. Anyway, don't want to get too into the weeds on it, but I absolutely agree that Linderbaum's performance this year has put a major extension for himself and Baltimore in jeopardy, and really should make the front office think twice about making him the highest paid center in the league next year.
There's one other thing going on here too, is the Ravens have 3 guys they really need to sign. And the guy they really need to sign is Lamar Jackson, first of all, to free up money and create an opportunity. But the other 2 guys they need to sign are Isaiah Likely, who isn't doing anything right now that would scream out that he needs to be made. But because the whole tight end room is going, he's a high priority. And the second one is Travis Jones, who's outplaying Linderbaum now by a wide margin. And he's so critical to this defense for the rest of this season. And in terms of being the one guy who you can kind of build your defensive line around, I think he's the guy they got to have. I think they can try again in the second round to get another center, maybe the third, and do the best they can. But they've got to try and use the 80-20 rule, probably with whoever Linderbaum's replacement would be.
100%. It's just where they've ended up. It's unfortunate. And his regression to an extent is unfortunate, or I guess maybe less regression and lack of continuing his upward trend. Somewhat of a plateauing, I feel like we've seen this season. Because like you said, he hasn't been outright bad. He's had a number of good performances, but he hasn't elevated into that all-pro center trajectory that, it seemed like he was on. Certainly the Ravens were hoping he'd get to. Want to move one to his right with Daniel Faalele. There's one rep of Faalele that I watched and I was really frustrated by, because he actually put it together really well. It happens every so often where I see a rep of his that's really well. This one, he was run blocking. He checked right, checked left, and immediately dove and aided a defender on the second level after checking to his right and left to make sure he didn't need to help with either side. It was the kind of rep where I was like, man, you know how to do it. You're capable of doing it. We just need to see that every down. How did Faalele do in this game?
Yeah, I mean, Faalele was bad in terms of his missed blocks, and he really looked bad on some run blocks. He looked bad moving into level 2 and finding people to block. There's some judgment in terms of moving to level 2 that I wasn't really crazy about. But he had 13 missed blocks in the game. Most of them were not losses at the line of scrimmage, which is at least as good. He did have 2 pressure events that he was party to, which, given the nature of this game where there was a whole lot of pressure, that's not a lot. He did give up a quarterback hit. That's all his fault. And I got to remember how he got beat on the play, but he allowed the initial pressure. It was on the very first, it was first drive of the second half. He was beaten outside by number 58. That's Grenard. And he drove him off the spot. Van Ginkel actually got the QH, but that's 100% on Faalele on that play. So, and other than that, he gave up 1/3 of a pressure where he and Rosengarten didn't execute a stun handoff, where there was also a third player who was getting beat at the same time. That's It's not good or anything. What is good about that play is that it wasn't a matter of depth was an issue on that. I felt like they both were continued to block the same guy when they should have been executing the handoff better. And that was unfortunate, but it does happen. His total score, he ends up with a D for the game at 0.73, and that's right in the middle of the D range for a guard. He had to get about 3 more points to get a C minus.
So something you've talked about with Falele at guard in the past is simply being able to use his size and the amount of space that he takes up. And on kind of a basic level, that seems like something that would be effective against heavy blitzing simply because it can force less efficient pass to the quarterback. But Falele obviously has to know how to use his size to do that effectively. It's something that we haven't quite seen out of him. How did that look in this game? And I guess more generally, do you feel like that's something that's come along at all this year?
I don't think that's a strength at all. I mean, I think that's a big weaknesses of his. I wouldn't pretend. In general, I think that people who bash on Falele do so without particularly good knowledge, and they're trying to build a narrative. But that particular one, no doubt about it, big weakness. One of the things that's plagued Falele in his career so far is processing. So it's not just a matter of he's ponderously slow of foot. He is that, but he also is slow to process, and that's been a problem in terms of going through the normal progression of things you have to do as a right guard. One is oftentimes with your left arm, you want to just have your hand on the center. So without having to think about it, you can have an idea by feel of how that center is doing with his block. Then you want to be starting to look to the right, and you pan across looking for a blitzer, a stunter being the second thing. And then your last thing is to decide who you need to help block on. And all that has to happen, boom, 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 or you're not going to have any impact on the play. So Falele is a guy that the guard bubble is very often over him. The other team doesn't really want to run directly into him in terms of their pass rush. They know they can exploit him in other ways. And so he's got to be very good about going through what his objective should be as the play moves on. It's actually something I thought Ben Cleveland was pretty good at Georgia, which is interesting because Falele I just have not seen at any point during his NFL career. We did see some good blocks from him, by the way, in this game. And when he gets latched onto somebody, when he gets a block started, he can get the turn he needs to. It's people say, oh, you've got to get individual push. Almost nobody gets one-on-one push in the NFL. The kind of push you get, you pivot a player and you turn him so that you can seal or kick out on a block. Very hard to get individual push. And when you do get individual push, it's often on a level 2 block where you're really blocking a much smaller man. Falele, he gets a fair amount of good pivoting and enough movement to open up a seam for players in the run game. He just is such a bad processor. And his slowness really gets in the way a lot, that he's hurt himself with that. For the record, I don't think that he's going to be back in Baltimore next year. I kind of hoped that they would try and figure out an extension earlier in the year when he played pretty well for a few games, that I thought there might be some price they could come up with. Now, I'm not sure it's worth the trouble. I think they have some draft picks. I think they'll try and go after somebody. I think they have some guys in house they can give a chance to in terms of Jones and Bullock that they will want to look at. I think it's really unfortunate that they lost some guys like Dellinger off the roster, who might have been around all year and possibly could have been someone who could step in. But at this point, I don't see Daniel re-signing. I actually think he's going to get paid pretty well somewhere because he's a good pass blocker.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think one of the reasons why an extension for him wasn't as realistic is because I'm not sure the price point that would have made sense for the Ravens would have made sense for Falele to take early, considering what guards out of this offense have been able to get in the last several rounds of free agency. Two other things you hit on Falele before we go to Rosengarten. One, like you said, the processing. That was why I mentioned the rep that I brought up at first, because he's the kind of guy where if he locks on the right block, he does fantastic. That's not the issue. The issue is locking on the right block in the first place. And so, mentioning that rep is, you see flashes of it, and you see flashes of what the Ravens see in him as a guard. It's just that he can't process quickly enough. And you mentioned Cleveland. one of the things I've noted about Cleveland is he is a gamer. He's come off the bench a number of times and has played well having to come off the bench. And I think part of that is his processing ability and his ability to not be in the wrong place and at least be able to hit his initial assignment. But anyway, moving on to Rosengarten, he's been a really interesting one for me this year that I felt like had at the beginning of the year appeared to regress from where he ended last year, but seems to have picked it up a little bit over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think actually he's been the Ravens' best lineman this season. So I'll start with that. But he missed 11 blocks in this game, and he gave up also 2 1/3 pressures, which happened to be the same number as Voorhees gave up. And it was exactly the same fractions, too. A 1/3 plus 2 times a half plus a 1. So Linderbaum gave up the most pressures in this game, but the 2 1/3 for Rosengarten is actually pretty good for a tackle to give up for an entire game. So he ended up scoring a C, and it's kind of at the bottom of the C range in terms of his base score. He got a little bit of an adjustment on top of that. Adjustment would have been more, except Lamar ran him out of an additional pressure. So he got a dinged for that slightly, but still gets into the C range. And he's been fairly solid for the year. I want to give you Rosen, because there's a comment made about Rosengarten earlier about the help. He's received a lot less help this year, and his score is down slightly, but I'd say his impact on the game is higher than it was as a rookie, which is really nice because he's a hell of a rookie player. But he's scoring right now in the high C range for the whole year. And that is honestly pretty damn good for a second-year tackle. And for those who don't know, Rosengarten graded out as the second best tackle after Joe Alt of all the rookies. Remember how great that left tackle class was last year? And all those guys who were good developmental players, Mims and Guyton and Sua Mataia, who I was a fan of, by the way. I'm not going to just harp on the safeties that I got right. That's a left tackle I got wrong on. But a whole bunch of guys that they just did not pan out at the NFL level, or they have not yet panned out. And Rosengarten actually a pretty quick adapter to the NFL.
I just want to make sure I have one thing right. When you talk about his grade slightly lower this year, but relative to the reduced amount of help that he's getting, that's what you're saying, by he's being a more impactful player.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. So he's probably 2.5 points lower than he was last year for the year, but because they gave him so much help as a rookie last year, I'd say he's been more impactful. Yeah.
Okay. And then I was wondering if you had any comments about how this line operated as a unit in this game, particularly in pass protection against the Vikings, something we've talked about a lot about their blitzing. How do they operate? We talked about them all individually. How do they operate as a unit?
Okay. So the team is regularly frustrating, and I would expect that to be the case when the line of scrimmage is jammed in any kind of zone blocking. And they can be frustrating when it's just 4 across and they start to put the elephants on parade, and you still get people crossing faces and little being done about that. But when the gaps are extra jammed up, it becomes that much harder to do any kind of zone blocking. So you really have to try gap schemes, and you have to try to get point of attack running done with Patrick Ricard leading the way, and use the weapons you have to the greatest effect you can. They still tried to do some zone blocking in this game, and when they did, it looked like crap. So if you're looking for a unit thing that didn't work out, I'd say it's that. They had a couple of times where they didn't negotiate stun handoffs properly. For the most part, everybody had a one-on-one blocking assignment, and the one-on-one blocking assignments getting lost, particularly to Hargrave in the middle, but also to Dallas Turner and others, were where the problem was.
Yeah, it felt like a much more individual problem than it was a systemic lack of preparedness for the blitz that it has felt like in some of these matchups in the past. Certainly felt that way in 21. It has felt like a more systemic unpreparedness for the blitz in some of their past games where they've struggled against the blitz or been blitzed very heavily. But this game felt much more of an individual blocking issue, as you've outlined.
All right, great stuff. I think one other thing coming out of this is that if you're looking where both guards are right now, I would have said Voorhees had quite a bit of leash, but he just turned in such a poor performance that leash is undeniably shortened. If you're a dog out on a walk on a leash, he's just started to bark at another dog pretty loudly right now, and so you need to rein him in a little bit.
Let me tell you about the online cannabis company that's changing the game, Mood.com. They created an entirely line of functional gummies. 100% federally legal THC blends discreetly delivered right to your doorstep. And here's the best part. You can get 20% off your first order at mood.com with the promo code Ravens. Now, I've tried a bunch of their gummies myself. Each one's totally unique. The Sleepy Time gummies knock me out right away. They help me unwind fast, leave me refreshed the next morning. The Epic Euphoria gummies, they're perfect for when your day just isn't going the way you want it to go. What makes Mood special is how they pair the THC with natural herbs and adaptogens. You won't find blends like this at any local shop. They've got gummies designed for focus, relaxation, clarity, even energy, all made from cannabis grown on small, family-owned American farms. No pesticides, no shortcuts, just high-quality weed you can trust. Plus, Mood backs everything with a 100-day satisfaction guarantee. So head on over to mood.com, check out their amazing selection, and don't forget to use the promo code Ravens at checkout to save 20% off your first order.
Potentially could lose his job at some point. Fa'alele is probably in a similar amount of jeopardy, maybe more than Voorhees right now. And I have not been saying there's any kind of realistic chance of that. They seem to like Emory Jones and where he is. We'll see if Emory Jones is really ready to play football. I will warn people, they haven't used Simpson the entire year. Cleveland the entire year when they've had a chance to. It would actually surprise me if Emory Jones came in and was immediately better than either player, because there's a trial by fire period. You often start off at a C- or D+ level, and you get better as the years go forward. And the Ravens have had an outstanding job of developing linemen along similar runways, oftentimes late round picks, that they make it a very good lineman by the time they leave the Ravens. It hasn't worked out for Fa'alele. It looks like it is working out for Voorhees. So I don't think in a second year they'd pull Voorhees. I think it's more likely, if I had to say so, that Fa'alele would be the guy who would lose his job.
And I think inherent in that too is, based on what you're saying, is also just the understanding that's probably not going to happen at all. No matter how it seems to look or how much fans seem to clamor for it or anything, it just doesn't seem like the kind of thing that's going to happen for a variety of reasons that we don't have to get into right now.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk some skill position players, and we just do this one at a time. We'll kind of have a one comment back and forth between us, but start us off. Who'd you like to talk about?
Let's talk about Derrick Henry. I think one worth noting the yardage totals that he hit in this game, not only to move to 15th all time, but also eclipsing his high school record, which was just kind of a neat thing. I think this was a tough game for Henry, like we've talked about with how crowded the line of scrimmage was, and just the inability for him to get space to make plays. I felt like his cuts and his running was kind of reactive to the fact that he just would get the ball and look in front of him, and there would just be a mess and no space to go. Mm-hmm. And so I felt, considering that, he did well, kind of like we talked about with Lamar Jackson on the first part of the episode. Considering his opportunity set, I think Henry did fairly well considering what he was dealing with.
I think that's a fair way to put it. And if you look, I mentioned that they had 5 first downs in the final 17 minutes of the game, and those 5 first downs rushing were, make sure I get this right, Henry, Ricard, and there's 2 others here that I missed so far, Henry and Jackson. So the
Ricard fullback dive was fantastic. No notes.
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. And once in a while, you just have to show the willingness to do that, and that means that they can't just auto shed on Ricard, which they will typically be trying to do. But it could have implications beyond this game that are good. Vontae Leach, when he came to Baltimore, I believe, had only 2 carries in his entire NFL career. I've got to look this up, and fumbled the ball twice. And when he was with Baltimore, he had a number of carries, I believe. That's my recollection. Now, let me look back at it here for a second. So, yeah, rushing the ball with Baltimore, he had, 32 attempts with Baltimore in his last 3 seasons of his career, from 30 on. Up to age 30, he'd only had 3 attempts, and he'd fumbled the ball twice. So, it's pretty great. He had of those 32 carries, he had 15 first downs for the Ravens in that period as well. Pretty cool. All right. Since you brought up Henry, I'll go ahead and bring up Mitchell, who was in there for a few plays. They did an interesting thing with the Mitchell spelling Henry for 3 consecutive carries. They had him in there for Pony once before where he didn't get the ball, I believe, and it was a Pony with him in the backfield with Henry. But then they ran him, gave him the ball 3 straight times, and to me that was I don't have a problem with it, but I'd rather that they sprinkle in the usage of Mitchell even more than that. They do take Henry out. Often we'll have him playing first and third down, or first and second down, then out third down. I think they could use a player like Mitchell out there for other first and second downs mostly. Well, no, Justice Hill is usually going to be the guy on third down, but I would have liked to see more sprinkled usage of Mitchell.
Yes, the thing with Mitchell that gets me is seeing it work a couple times, seeing it not work once, and then not really going back to him for most of the rest of the game. That Pony rep that you mentioned, there's so many things they can do with him and Henry in a Pony set that they just don't do. It boggles my mind. We'll move on to another player. Zay Flowers just continues to be outstanding. I think the step that he took last year was so phenomenal. And then this year, you can see that he's taking an entire other step and really becoming almost a complete wide receiver. And I was really impressed this game, him being the only guy who could really do much downfield. Obviously, they're also very comfortable getting him the ball in these design touch situations close to the line of scrimmage. Like I said, I think the Vikings were quite prepared for that aspect. But there was one play in particular where the Ravens ran play action and both the linebackers bit, and Flowers was all alone in the middle of the field. And I think that just super basic element of the Ravens offense, they were still able to operate it in this game because they have a guy like Flowers.
We talked about Lamar Jackson, his opportunity set in the first half of the show. And one of the things is he got kind of betrayed by his receivers. Flowers had one of the drops, and then each tight end, likely, and Andrews had a drop. But Flowers really took it directly on the helmet and had turned his head and kind of figuring out how he was going to get upfield. And it looked like to me that was probably not going to be a gain on the play. Like he's about 4 yards behind the line of scrimmage, if I recall correctly, where the ball was caught. And it looked like he was going to go for about 0 on the play. I'm not always right about that. He might have made somebody miss and gotten 10 yards or whatever, but it was a bad looking drop in particular. And I've generally been happy that Monken has not been using him for as much gadgetry this year. There was some in this game. Obviously, he had the touch on the jet motion where he fumbled the ball, but I've been happy that they're using him to impact the safety down the field. And I think that's a much better use of him, generally speaking. You manipulate the defense and force their hand and present them actual coverage dilemmas if Flowers is down the field as opposed to in the backfield.
Actually, sorry, it's your turn.
Yeah, it's my turn, damn it. I'm just kidding. I want to talk about the absence of Tez Walker for a second, because he's a guy who I thought could have helped throw over the defense, something the Ravens never did in this game. But if you want to have him in there, we talked about it a little bit, I think, of the first one, that he could do it with, they could try it with Hopkins one-on-one down the sideline, and they could have tried it with Tez Walker on some longer plays to get a pass out quickly with air under it that Walker could go run under and track and beat a corner, particularly when they're showing a cover 0 look.
Yeah, that's something I guess I hope they develop Walker into. I think he's such a dynamic, exciting deep threat. The size, the athleticism, it's just the kind of player in terms of a pure deep threat they just really have not quite had under Jackson, certainly not that they've had from the jump as a rookie. The next player I'd like to go to is Hopkins. I believe actually he's still not getting a ton of looks in this offense. I thought was another weapon they could have used a little bit more aggressively against the blitz, giving that veteran feel at the catch point and his hands. So I felt like he wasn't as much of a featured option against the blitz as I was expecting. My favorite play of his, actually, probably the more impressive thing, was the touch on the Lamar Jackson pass. This was into the right, kind of right flat, right short area of the field. If you remember the specific pass I'm talking about, really, really nice touch, but also puts it in a spot where, Hopkins can go up and get it without having to make a crazy play on it. Bateman's dealing with this ankle sprain, might be, a chance to just do more with Hopkins. Not that they've, I don't want to say I'm criticizing them for not doing enough with Hopkins. They have so many mouths to feed. They've done a good job hitting him in some really high leverage moments. But I do think just the element of getting him going and being a little bit more of a constant part of the offense is just a good thing to figure out for the rest of the season.
I want to have a package of plays for the guy. And but I think he is sort of limited as a receiver in terms of how he can help you right now. You really want him to be one-on-one on the outside. You don't want a safety anywhere near him and the possibility of a bracket developing. Excuse me. But the thing I would point to is that I think if Tez Walker and Hopkins kind of have an opportunity to battle for playing time that Bateman loses here over, say, a 1 to 2 week period, and I hope Bateman doesn't miss much time because he's an awfully important part of the offense. It would be great to see Tez Walker eat Hopkins lunch right now. Not that Hopkins will play badly. That Hopkins is fine, but isn't getting separation, and he's just doing a reasonably good job of catching the ball. But the Walker all of a sudden becomes a guy who can run a comeback route effectively and can run a post route or a corner route or whatever you need him to go. Boy, would that be great to see in the absence of Bateman if that were to occur. All right, I think is it your turn or is it my turn here? So
I just talked about Hopkins, so you can go.
All right. Kind of a tough game for Charlie Kolar, who didn't look real great as a pass blocker. He did have a couple of catches. He's one of the only guys who had a reasonable yards per target number in this game. Is Flowers and the rest kind of thing, where a bunch of guys had 4, 5, 6 yards at target instead of Flowers, who was up around 10. Actually, I think Flowers might have been at 12. But Kolar was 11 and a half or something. I think he was 2 for 23 in the game, but he didn't block well, and he definitely had some problems being an extra man in protection in this game. That's been something he's been very good at. He needs to at least maintain and probably improve his level as a run blocker. It's not clear to me where he's headed after the season. I think he's probably going to be more valued somewhere else than he will be in Baltimore. That was the case with Josh Oliver. I think he's actually kind of a very similar player.
I think he's a similar player. And unlike Josh Oliver, who kind of got more chances in Jacksonville to show what he might be able to do as a receiver and just really couldn't show much, Kolar has shown he's a capable receiver when he is asked to be. He's just not asked to be in this offense, understandably. But, that catch and run that he made against the Vikings is, that's the kind of play a team would love to be getting out of their tight end too. And that's the kind of play that he makes pretty consistently. He's the kind of player, something we noted, I think, about similarly to Tylan Wallace last year is they're not getting a ton of opportunities, but when they do get them, they make the most of them. Kolar, I felt like hasn't gotten as many opportunities as I expected this year with Likely out. Just was not, incorporated into the passing offense as much, wasn't drawing the easiest matchup on the field quite as often either. But I do think he's going to be in line for a pretty nice payday this offseason.
Yeah, I'm with you. If we're good.
No, I mean, the only guy I was going to mention was Patrick Ricard. We've talked about him a little bit. The only thing that I wanted to add is just, it is real how important he is, right? It's kind of funny. Earlier in the year, there was some conflict, in the Twitter sphere about, will Patrick Ricard coming back save this run game? No, this offensive line has a lot more issues than that. I think both things kind of ended up being true. That the offensive line still has a lot of issues in their run blocking, but that having Ricard as, a blocking weapon, the likes of which really there aren't that many other players that are used like him around the NFL, if any, that are used as a blocking weapon. Having that back, just it does wonders in limiting the negative plays, I think is one of the big things that it does. So not only is he opening up more opportunities on the second level, but I also think him just having his heft at the point of attack is helping limit the penetration and the kind of the push back of the offensive line into the backfield.
This is the kind of game they really needed Ricard. First of all, they ran the ball a lot. They ran the ball to win the game, which was to put it away, which was good. And maybe most importantly, they really needed to play point of attack football against what the Vikings presented them. So they needed to misdirection was of less use in a game like this than it would be in others. And they did a good job, using him appropriately. So I was very positive on that. One thing that is interesting about how the Ravens have managed their roster is they've still got Lucas Scott sitting on the practice squad. So they could have, and they've had needs for practice squad spots the entire year. They could have at any point in time let him go with the hope that they could, stay in touch with him and get him back, because there aren't that many teams that use a fullback, right? So you'd have presumably an opportunity to bring him back, but they haven't done it. And the other thing is that if you did lose Lucas Scott, any team can have him right now and put him on their roster. So if another team signs him to their practice squad and the Ravens have a problem where Ricard is hurt and they need a replacement, they still can go right back to Lucas Scott and say, hey, our system, come back and you're on the roster for 3 weeks guaranteed at a minimum. And no one will turn that down that's sitting on a practice squad. They won't turn down those kind of signings. So
yeah, I think it speaks to just they're aware of the fact that Ricard is just getting older, as human beings do, and at some point we'll need to find someone else to fill his role. Right. And it seems they want to continue to have that role in the offense. It's not a case where you lose the player that fits that role and you kind of de-emphasize that role in the offense. They want to make sure they can keep what he contributes.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I think it's part of the Ravens' DNA to have a fullback available and maintain the ability to do that, particularly with having Lamar Jackson at quarterback. So I'm with you all the way on that. I'll tell you what, we're going to do a brief mailbag question. I think we've only got one, but I'm going to check the wire again. While we're doing that, come up with a 1, 2, 3 list for MVPs for me, and we'll do the countdown method that we normally do here. So we got one question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the MVP list, but go with the question first.
You save your MVP list. We're going to do that last. So the question is first. So first, it's from Angelove85, who says, hi, Ken, thoughts on the quick passing game and Lamar playing as a game manager could go a long way in the playoffs. Also, thoughts on Monken deciding to pass versus run on third down when Minnesota had 0 timeouts on the last offensive drive. Has done it before, which cost us games. So let's address the second part first, because I think you had some things to say about that earlier, and I don't want to speak for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I would have run the ball there. They had already used their third timeout. I would have chewed the extra 40 seconds off the clock. I completely understand you go for it, you get it, you win the game. But I think that the time that you chew is worth more considering how your defense is played. And I think going for it is still kind of a big vote of confidence in the defense anyway. But I also think like how well Jordan Stout and special teams had been playing. I think I still would have run that ball, knowing that there's a chance to get that first down when you run the ball. It's not like running the ball automatically means you don't get the first down. I would have, assuming you don't get it, I would have had Jordan Stout and the punt coverage team do another bang up job like they did all game. I don't get me wrong. I get why Monken did that and went for that, passed the ball there. I totally get it. It's just, I would not have done it that way personally.
Right. I do agree, by the way. And I think one of the things, there is some residual chance to get the first down. I think also the chance to get the first down by throwing was lower the way the Vikings were trying to address what the Ravens were doing. So they're going to play some guard the exits football, keep the men at the line of scrimmage, and try and get a man-on-man play in the secondary to stop some sort of reception there. And I'm afraid they had a pretty good chance to do it under those circumstances. Jackson also had not thrown a lot of passes in that fourth quarter in total. So he might have been, a little cooler in terms of where he was for accuracy. It didn't have an overall great accuracy game. Some of it was, about 3 of it was drops by his own receivers, but he also, had other throws that were just off target or they were tipped at the line of scrimmage. As it was, that pass was tipped at the line of scrimmage, went high up in the air, and was nearly a disastrous interception. So that would have been, considerably worse, obviously, and one of the real risks of throwing.
Yeah, I think just an element of not having read the game, as it's gone. They were getting their hands on a lot of passes at the line of scrimmage, and so I think for a number of reasons that decision went against how the game had played out.
Let's address the other point that Angela makes. It's that the quick passing game and making Lamar a game manager. I don't know if I'd really call this game management what he did. It's trying to get offense out of a very difficult pressure situation. I didn't think the Ravens did that great a job of doing that. Now, Lamar was above his opportunity set, so I'm not saying that was bad. I didn't have turnovers, which was good. maybe that's what you mean by game manager. The ball was in jeopardy a little bit. It was on the ground from Flowers. It was on the ground from Mitchell. I think likely might have had a fumble in the game, not 100% sure. And there were a couple batted passes, including at a critical juncture that we just talked about. What I would say otherwise, though, is Lamar didn't do a particularly great job, or Monken didn't do a particularly good job of trying to take what the defense was giving them. So when you see a cover zero look of trying to get over the defense as opposed to throwing something underneath, you're just doing them a favor to try and throw it underneath. You might get the ball batted near the line of scrimmage. They're trying to play short area defense, and you're basically giving them what they're asking for by not throwing the ball over them.
Yeah, the game manager thing, I think that applies when you do what the Ravens did and you're not facing that amount of pressure. When you're facing that amount of pressure, they're not managing the game. They're just responding to what the defense is throwing at them.
Right.
To me, game management is when you intentionally, look at a more average opportunity set and intentionally focus on a quick throw underneath everything on time system. Which is just not what the Ravens do. It was to I forget who asked the question. Apologies, but kind of to your point though, it is good that they have this in their tool bag and have gone through this game already and have kind of worked on their plan for dealing with this kind of an opponent.
Yeah, this was as difficult a situation. It is typical of the situations they've seen this year in a sense. Stylistically, it's been similar, but nobody's tried the kind of extreme pressure that Flores did in this game. And he's a good coach. It's obviously seems to be an Achilles of the Ravens in general. And it might be a problem with both the offensive line. It might be a problem with some of their skill position protections and whatnot. But they do seem to have a problem, running their offense against this kind of system. So going through it during the regular season is probably a good thing. Whether it means they'll face challenges against a team like Pittsburgh later, or they'll face challenges against other teams down the road. Yeah. All right. So let's talk MVPs here. We'll do a 3-2-1 countdown. Tell us who your number 3 guy is.
Patrick Ricard. I think that Ricard was like we just talked about shortly before this, such a key element of countering this type of defense specifically. We've seen the kind of impact that he has on their run game in general since returning. But I think in a game like this, for the reasons you described earlier, having him available is key. Just being able to use him is key. And then obviously, I think he looked better in this game than he did against Miami. And against Chicago. I think he probably looked about the same against Chicago, if I remember correctly. But I just think that the lack of negative plays was a huge part of this game, of the offense for this game.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't object at all to that. I probably should have thought of it myself. My number 3 guy is probably a guy who's less impactful. And again, it's looking forward to the rest of the season. But I thought the play of Keaton Mitchell is something they want to expand upon. And I hope that him rushing for 4 for 31, I think, in this game is enough to get them thinking, how can we see more of Keaton Mitchell? How can we incorporate him more? And I want to see more of Keaton Mitchell as a flanker specifically. I want to see him in the way that Washington used their 2 running backs a few years ago, with putting a running back and splitting him wide. So it's not truly a pony formation, but it does have 2 running backs on the field with him in the flanker. If you think back to the late 1970s Colts and the Joe Washington era, he was a player that was used all over the field in terms of what he could do. And the Colts didn't have a lot of offensive weapons in that era, so I'm not saying that they had a lot of choices, but he was a very good one, and I think Keaton Mitchell could give them a real spark if they could find different ways to use him. Could be that Bateman's absence also increases the willingness to put him on the field in that role.
Yeah, he almost broke that one off. It's so amazing to see Keaton Mitchell burst through these holes and look like he's driving a speedboat and the mountains are about to crash into each other and he's getting through. He almost broke that one off. It's just nice to see him back on the field on just a really basic human level. Such an exciting player. So frustrating to see him not used, and to see him back there has been really nice. My number 2 MVP is Zay Flowers. I talked about him earlier in this episode as well. What he is able to do for this offense in a way that they just haven't had a player quite like Flowers in the Jackson era that is able to just separate so consistently as he is just impossible to cover on some of these dig routes. And then what we've noticed from him this year is really improving his yak game in this careful balance that I think he's struck between his dancing and his making guys miss, but doing that productively, doing that in order to gain more yards instead of just doing it and dancing in the same spot. I think that's one thing that he's really improved on. It didn't show up too much in this game. Again, a tough game, a weird game for him. The Vikings were very prepared for the Ravens trying to go to him on quick hitters and screens to counter the blitz. And so I think some elements of his game were taken out by their approach. But he came up, a couple of times and they needed a pass downfield. He was the guy they went to.
Yeah, I've loved what he's become as a receiver in terms of a guy who cannot be dealt with at the top of the stem easily. And he's very different from Bateman. Bateman has all the routes available in the tree. He can do whatever you want. And he's in some way, Bateman's skill set is wasted with the Ravens because Lamar is just not that on schedule thrower. If he were with a different quarterback, he'd be used a lot more in that particular role to break open and the football's already on the way when he does. And he comes up good in separation metrics. But on the other side, Flowers, who also is my number 2 guy, is a guy who can stick his foot on the ground and no one can stay with him. He does not have to sink his hips the way that larger receivers do, sit in the chair in order to change direction, to decelerate. He can just stick his foot and turn like a Ferrari in any direction he would want. And it's after that turn that Lamar usually gauges whether he can hit him or not. And then he has time to figure out how he can make his up and down throw. And Lamar and Flowers have been very good at keeping the ball out of danger on the throws to him, which is another big positive. I mean, the ball's in danger to some other receivers that Lamar makes throws to, but generally speaking, the crosser in the middle of the field between level 2 and level 3 has been Flowers' domain this year. He's been very effective.
Yeah, I think what's been so exciting about Flowers is he comes in as a player who can naturally separate with his pure athleticism so well, but you can see, even maybe not quite week by week, but certainly year over year, him developing the nuances of route running that turn his natural separation ability into being uncoverable. And yeah, Rashad Bateman, as much as he's fantastic value for the Ravens and such a big part of their offense, you send him to like New England with Drake May, and he is just absolutely feasting in an offense like that with such a pass heavy, deep ball loving quarterback. It's one of the things that I always kind of rue about Bateman. I love him being in Baltimore. His contract is such a good value, but I agree that we're not seeing everything that we could see out of that player.
Yeah.
Number 1, I don't think this is any question. It's probably the case every single time you do this. Lamar Jackson. A very different Lamar Jackson, as that mailbag question we had just pointed out, had the game plan. This is what we're going to do. He went out, executed it. You could tell he was frustrated by the blocking. He was frustrated by some of his passes getting batted down. But credit to him for, staying in the plan the whole game. You did not see what we've talked about before, which can be an issue sometimes, is when he just drifts back and back and back against the blitz. It's what he did against Miami in 2021. And he really came out and a very concerted effort to protect the ball and to not put himself in those same positions. It's such an unremarkable, unexciting game from a player like Lamar Jackson. And yet it was exactly what the Ravens needed.
Yeah, I'm with you. And he's 26 yards above his expectation when you realize just how crappy that opportunity set was. And yet he still had, 3 drops. The Flowers drop, I don't think it actually cost him yards, but the likely in Andrews yards, the Andrews drop might have cost him a touchdown. The likely drop cost him some significant yards too. So he could have been significantly better. And there are going to be games where Lamar Jackson is let down for his receivers. He was not perfect. He did let the ball get in trouble a couple of times, but fortunately did not have a giveaway in this game and kept the Ravens streak going. So he's also my number 1. And I think we can end on that. Nick, always a pleasure to talk football with you. Tell folks, where you are now, where they can read your stuff and follow you online.
Yeah, you can find my work at Baltimore Beatdown. I started there this season and have been having a fantastic time with my staff over there. And you can find me on Twitter or X at Nik, N-I-K, knows ball. Always happy to come discuss anything Ravens related, salary cap, anything like that.
All right. Other folks out there, thanks so much for listening. As always, please make use of hashtag Filmstudy Mailbag. If you have an idea for a short, hit me up with that. There'll probably be an opportunity after Thanksgiving to do a couple shorts, and I'm always looking for new ideas. I've had a few good ones, by the way, and always want to hear when you're passionate about something. This is kind of the way I get people for the various series I do during a year. So if you start by doing a short, I mean, Nick, you probably did a short at some point, or maybe I met you at camp, I'm not sure. But anyway, then we had an opportunity to do other shows together, and then the defense and offensive shows are kind of the ones that I reserve only for people who've been on it for a few times before. But I'm really eager to meet new people who want to talk Ravens football on this show, and I always appreciate people who want to take a moment to do so. Nick, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.